Congresswoman Omar, if the United States and Somalia went to war tomorrow, hypothetically, which side would you want to win? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had just been fired. It was a simple sentence, stripped of legal jargon or political nuance, delivered with the deceptive gentleness that was Senator John Kennedy's trademark. His Louisiana drawl made the inquiry sound almost casual, like he was asking about the humidity or the price of crawfish. But every single person packed into the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing room knew immediately that this was not a casual question. This was the kill shot. This was the culmination of 90 minutes of methodical, surgical questioning that had stripped away every layer of defense Ilhan Omar had brought with her. Complete silence descended on the room. It was the kind of heavy, crushing silence that has physical weight, pressing down on the chest and making every breath feel shallow. The air conditioning hummed a low, indifferent drone, which only seemed to amplify the tension. Ilhan Omar sat at the witness table, a solitary figure in a bright hijab, flanked by 3 high-priced attorneys in tailored suits who were suddenly very still. When she had walked into the Hart Senate office building 2 hours ago, she had projected an aura of invincible confidence. She had walked with her chin up, smiling at the cameras, waving to the supporters who had gathered outside. She had survived Republican attacks before. She had been called a terrorist, accused of anti-Semitism, investigated for campaign finance violations, and targeted by the president himself. Every time, she had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger, celebrated by her progressive base as a martyr, a warrior, a survivor. She had learned to turn controversy into currency, monetizing the outrage to build a massive fundraising apparatus. But this was different. The atmosphere in the room wasn't partisan. It was predatory. This wasn't a debate about tax marginal rates or healthcare policy. This was a binary choice: America or Somalia, us or them. And as the seconds ticked by, it became horrifyingly clear to everyone watching that she couldn't answer it. 10 seconds of silence became 15. 15 became 20. The C-SPAN cameras zoomed in tight on her face, capturing the minute twitch of a muscle in her jaw, the way her eyes darted briefly to her lead counsel, who stared straight ahead, offering no lifeline. Every cable news network in the country, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, had broken away from regular programming to cover this exchange live. Millions of people were watching this silence. "That's a ridiculous hypothetical," Omar finally said. Her voice had that sharp, defensive edge she often adopted when cornered, a tone that usually signaled a pivot to victimhood. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound was brittle. "We are not at war with Somalia. We are allies." Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't smirk. He just sat there, peering over his reading glasses, looking like a disappointed school principal. "It's a simple question, ma'am," Kennedy said softly. "Every American citizen should be able to answer it in 1 second. If we were at war, which side would you want to win?" Another pause. You could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes. It was a trap, but it was a trap of her own making. If she said America, she would be on record contradicting everything she had told her Somali American base for years. That America was an imperialist aggressor, that Somalia was the victim, that our people back home were under attack by the U.S. war machine. If she said Somalia, her career in the United States Congress would end before the sun went down. She would be branded a traitor on national television. So she tried to choose the third option: rejection of the premise. I refuse to engage with Islamophobic hypotheticals designed to question my loyalty based on my faith, she declared, her voice rising in rehearsed indignation. This line of questioning is beneath the dignity of this committee. Kennedy held up a hand. His movement was slow, deliberate. I haven't mentioned your religion once, ma'am, Kennedy said. Not once in 2 hours. I haven't asked about your prayer rug. I haven't asked about your mosque. I've asked about your allegiance to countries, not your faith. I've asked which country you'd choose if forced to choose. America or Somalia? That's not about Islam. That's about loyalty. He picked up a document from the stack in front of him. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. Because we have recordings, Congresswoman. We have recordings of you telling Somali American audiences that our homeland is being attacked by America. You've said our people back home need protection from the United States. You've referred to Somalia as home in the present tense 43 times in the past 5 years. Kennedy looked up, his eyes hard. So, I'm asking, simply for clarification, when you say home, which country do you mean? I can have a complex identity, Omar parried, gripping the edge of the table. I am Somali American. My heritage is— You can have any identity you want, ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, cutting through the spin. You can be proud of your heritage. You can love Somali culture. You can cook Somali food. But you can only have one political allegiance in the United States Congress. You swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States, not the Somali Constitution. Not both. One. Kennedy leaned forward, closing the distance between them. So, one last time, for the record. If America and Somalia went to war, which side would you want to win? The silence returned, deeper and darker than before. 30 seconds passed. It was an eternity in television time. It was the sound of a political career flatlining. She sat there, frozen, realizing that there were no magic words, no accusations of racism, no pivots that could save her from the simple, brutal reality of the question. She was an American Congresswoman who could not say she wanted America to win. To understand the sheer weight of that silence, to understand how a celebrated progressive icon found herself pinned to a witness chair, unable to pledge allegiance to the country she served, you have to rewind the clock. You have to go back 3 weeks, to the morning the ground first began to shift beneath Ilhan Omar's feet. The catalyst wasn't a tweet or a cable news segment. It was a piece of deep-dive investigative journalism that landed with the force of a bunker buster. On a cold Tuesday morning in January, ProPublica published a 10,000-word exposé titled The Congresswoman's Secret Coordination. It wasn't an opinion piece. It was a data dump. It was the kind of reporting that destroys careers because it deals in hard, cold metadata. For months, investigative reporters had been tracking the digital footprint of Omar's congressional office. They hadn't just looked at public schedules, they had obtained call logs, encrypted messaging metadata, and cross-referenced them with flight manifests and financial disclosures. The headline was stark, but the details were devastating. The investigation revealed a pattern that was too precise to be coincidental. It showed a systematic loop of information and influence that bypassed the State Department and the White House, establishing a direct shadow channel between a sitting U.S. Congresswoman and the government of Somalia. The report laid out the evidence in undeniable graphics. It showed phone records indicating hundreds of calls between Omar's personal cell phone and high-ranking officials in the Somali Foreign Ministry. It showed emails coordinating messaging strategies on U.S. legislation. It showed meeting logs that had been redacted or entirely omitted from her official disclosures. But the most damaging revelation was the financial web. The investigation traced hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing from organizations and business interests with direct ties to the Somali government into the coffers of Omar's campaign and, more troublingly, into the accounts of her husband's political consulting firm. The article painted a picture not of a representative engaging in diplomacy, but of an asset engaging in coordination. The pattern, as the investigators called it, was simple and terrifyingly consistent. The report documented 17 specific instances over the last 3 years where the timeline followed the exact same sequence. Step 1. Congresswoman Omar would attend a classified briefing on the House Foreign Affairs Committee regarding East African security, counterterrorism operations, or U.S. military strategy in the Horn of Africa. Step 2. Within 48 hours of leaving the Secure Compartmented Information Facility, SCCF, metadata showed a flurry of encrypted communications or direct phone calls between Omar's device and Somali government officials. Step 3. Within days of those calls, the Somali government would issue statements or take military actions that seemed to perfectly anticipate U.S. policy shifts, or Omar would introduce legislation or make public statements that perfectly aligned with the Somali government's desired outcome, often contradicting the Biden administration's own stance. One specific example from the report stood out, capturing the public's attention. In late 2024, the U.S. was preparing a covert sanction package against 3 Somali generals accused of diverting food aid to al-Shabaab terrorists. It was top-secret information, known only to a handful of people in the intelligence community and the Foreign Affairs Committee. Omar received the briefing on a Thursday. On Friday morning, she had a 40-minute call with the Somali ambassador. On Saturday, the 3 generals in question suddenly liquidated their assets in Western banks and moved their families to non-extradition countries, days before the sanctions were set to be announced. The ProPublica story didn't explicitly use the word espionage. It didn't have to. The data screamed it. The fallout was immediate. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee, usually a slow-moving and deliberative body, was forced into action. They couldn't ignore the implications of a member of Congress potentially compromising national security operations. Republicans demanded hearings immediately. Moderate Democrats, terrified of being dragged down by the scandal, quietly signaled they wouldn't stand in the way. A subpoena was issued. When Ilhan Omar received the summons, she dismissed it, as she always did. Her team spun it as a partisan witch hunt. They sent out fundraising emails claiming she was being targeted for her bold anti-imperialist vision. They rallied the squad. They prepared for a fight on the terrain of culture war and identity politics. But they had miscalculated. They thought they were walking into a media circus where they could play the role of the victim. Instead, they were walking into a legal and forensic trap set by Senator John Kennedy and his staff. While Omar was prepping sound bites, Kennedy's team was building a dossier. They weren't interested in her tweets. They were interested in her loyalty. And as the hearing began and the cameras rolled, the ProPublica report sat in the center of the witness table, a stack of paper that had turned a political celebrity into a suspect. The stage was set, not for a debate, but for an exposure. What Ilhan Omar didn't know, what she couldn't see from her position in the spotlight of the witness table, was that the trap she had just walked into had been set 6 weeks earlier, in a quiet, book-lined office in the Russell Senate office building. While Omar's team was busy crafting tweets and preparing for cable news shouting matches, Senator John Kennedy had gone to ground. He had summoned his chief of staff and his senior legal researchers and given them a directive that was as simple as it was exhaustive. I don't want the spin. I want the data. Get me everything she has ever said about Somalia versus America. Kennedy was 73 years old, with the deceptively leisurely demeanor of a small-town Southern lawyer who might spend his afternoons on a front porch drinking iced tea. His Louisiana drawl and folksy colloquialisms, madder than a wet hen, drunk as Outer's dog, often led opponents to underestimate him. They saw the caricature and missed the resume. Vanderbilt undergraduate, University of Virginia Law School, a year at Oxford, and 20 years of practicing law before he ever set foot in the Senate. He was a forensic interrogator disguised as a country bumpkin. "What did you find?" Kennedy had asked his team 3 weeks into the research phase. His chief of staff placed 3 heavy boxes on the desk. They weren't filled with opposition research or rumors. They were filled with transcripts. "It's a linguistic fingerprint, Senator," the aide said. "We analyzed 5 years of her speeches, town halls, interviews, and fundraisers. We ran a frequency analysis on her pronoun usage and her geographic references. The pattern isn't just a slip of the tongue, it is a world view." Kennedy put on his reading glasses and picked up the first summary report. "She consistently identifies as Somali first, American second, or often not American at all," the aide explained. "When she speaks to Somali-American audiences, she uses we and us to describe the Somali people and the Somali government. When she speaks about America or the U.S. government, she switches to they and them, or this country. She almost never says, my country." Kennedy flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "Give me the numbers." "We found 43 documented instances in the past 5 years where she refers to Somalia as home, homeland, or back home in the present tense," the aide said. "Not where I am from or where I was born. She says, our homeland is under attack. We must help our people back home." It is the language of a current resident, not a former refugee. Kennedy stopped at a transcript from a 2019 speech at a Minneapolis community center. Quote, "Our homeland is under attack by American drones. Our people are being killed." She calls the U.S. military American drones, Kennedy noted, not our drones, and she calls the targets our people. He picked up another transcript from a 2023 University of Minnesota speech. Quote, "Somalia is in our blood, in our hearts. We can never forget where we come from. We are the voice of our nation here in the belly of the beast." "The belly of the beast," Kennedy repeated softly. "That's America. She is a United States Congresswoman calling the United States the belly of the beast." "And here is the contrast," the aide said, sliding a thinner file across the desk. "We looked for instances where she referred to the United States as home or my homeland. We looked for instances where she said we when referring to the U.S. military or U.S. foreign policy. And statistically zero, Senator. In 5 years of public speaking, we could not find a single clear instance where she identified her national allegiance as American in the same way she identifies it as Somali." Kennedy sat back in his chair, the leather creaking in the quiet office. This wasn't just rhetoric. This was evidence of a divided soul. She was legally American, but emotionally and politically, she was operating as an expatriate of Somalia living in hostile territory. "Pull her voting record," Kennedy ordered. "Words are one thing. I want to know if she votes like she talks." They spent the next 2 weeks cross-referencing the congressional record. The pattern they found was absolute. Every time a bill came up that forced a choice between U.S. strategic interests and the desires of the Somali government, Omar sided with Somalia. Every single time. By the morning of the hearing, Kennedy had distilled thousands of pages of research into a single, devastating binder. He knew exactly where he was going to take her. He wasn't going to yell. He wasn't going to grandstand. He was simply going to walk her through her own words until she had nowhere left to hide. Back in the hearing room, the air was still charged with the tension of Kennedy's opening salvo. He sat calmly at the dais, arranging his papers with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who has nowhere else to be. "Congresswoman," Kennedy said, looking at her over the rim of his glasses, "I want to talk about the day you became a citizen of the United States. Do you remember that day?" Omar blinked, surprised by the shift in tone. She had expected him to hammer her on the ProPublica report immediately. This felt like a soft opening. "Of course," she said, her posture relaxing slightly. "It was a very proud day for me, to finally belong." "I believe you," Kennedy said. "I truly do. But when you stood there and raised your right hand, you took an oath, the oath of allegiance. It is a very specific legal text. Do you remember what you swore?" "I swore to uphold the Constitution," Omar said. "You did," Kennedy agreed. "But you did more than that. The very first clause of that oath is not about what you support. It is about what you reject." He picked up a card and read from it. "You swore that you absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen." Kennedy put the card down and looked at her. "Renounce and abjure," he repeated. "Those are strong words, ma'am. They mean you give it up, completely. You walk away from it. You are no longer theirs. You are ours." "But looking at your record," Kennedy said, reaching for the binder his staff had prepared, "I am having a hard time seeing where the renouncing happened. Because you haven't renounced allegiance to Somalia, have you? You still call it home. You still call Somalis our people, in a political sense. You still vote to protect their government." "That is an unfair characterization," Omar protested. "I can care about the country of my birth without being disloyal to America." "Let's look at the votes," Kennedy said. "Because talk is cheap. Votes are permanent." He held up a large chart, mounted on foam board, so the cameras could see it clearly. It was a simple grid. 12 votes. 5 years. "In the past 5 years," Kennedy said, using a pen to point at the chart, "there have been 12 bills, amendments, or resolutions in the House of Representatives that directly related to Somalia. Sanctions on corrupt officials, conditions on foreign aid, oversight measures, condemnations of human rights abuses. 12 separate votes," Kennedy said. "Do you know how you voted on those 12 measures?" Omar didn't answer. She stared at the chart, knowing exactly what it showed. "You voted in favor of Somali government interests and against stated U.S. policy positions all 12 times, Kennedy said. 100%. "Let me give you a specific example," Kennedy continued, flipping a page in his binder. 2021. There was a bill to impose targeted sanctions on 15 Somali government officials and military officers who had documented ties to al-Shabaab. The bill was specific. It named the 15 individuals. These were bad guys, ma'am. Terrorist sympathizers. The bill passed the House 391-4, Kennedy noted. It was overwhelmingly bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats agreed these men were dangerous. You were one of the 4 who voted no. He looked at her. Why did you vote to protect Somali officials who work with terrorists? The bill was overly broad, Omar said quickly, falling back on her prepared defense. Sanctions regimes often hurt innocent civilians. I have a consistent libertarian stance on sanctions. Ma'am, I just told you it named 15 specific individuals, Kennedy corrected gently. It wasn't broad. It was a laser. It froze their bank accounts. It didn't hurt a single civilian, but it did hurt the Somali government. Let's try another one, Kennedy said, moving down the list. 2022. An amendment to add oversight to $400 million in U.S. foreign aid to Somalia. We send them a lot of money, Congresswoman. This amendment just required them to show us receipts, to prove they weren't stealing it. It passed 357 to 18, Kennedy said. You voted no. Why vote against transparency? Kennedy asked. Why vote against ensuring American taxpayer dollars aren't stolen? Unless, of course, the people stealing it are the ones you call our people. I voted against it because the reporting requirements were onerous and colonialist, she said. Colonialist, Kennedy repeated, tasting the word. Asking for a receipt for $400 million of American taxpayer money is colonialist. Okay. He leaned forward, dropping the folksy demeanor for a moment. Here is what I see, Congresswoman. I see a pattern where every single time you have to choose between the interests of the United States and the interests of the Somali government, you choose Somalia. 12 times out of 12. And here is the kicker, Kennedy said, pulling out a calendar overlay that he placed on top of the voting chart. Every single one of these votes happened within 2 weeks of you meeting with Somali government officials. He pointed to the timeline. August 2021. You meet with the Somali ambassador. 2 weeks later, you vote against sanctions. March 2022. You meet with the foreign minister. 1 week later, you vote against the oversight amendment. September 2023. You meet with the prime minister. 10 days later, you vote against a resolution condemning human rights abuses. Kennedy looked up, his expression grave. That is not coincidence, ma'am, he said. That is coordination. That is a member of Congress taking marching orders. Let's talk about your finances, Kennedy said, shifting gears seamlessly. Because in my experience, ideology tells you what a person thinks, but their bank account tells you why they think it. He pulled out a stack of Federal Election Commission, FEC, reports and spread them across the dais. Your campaign and your family's business interests have done very well in the last few years, Kennedy observed, especially when it comes to donations from a specific demographic. He picked up a highlighted report. 2022 election cycle. Your campaign received $847,000 from an organization called the Somali American Leadership Council. That is a substantial amount from a single source. Nearly $1 million. Kennedy looked up. What is the Somali American Leadership Council, Congresswoman? It is a community organization that supports Somali American candidates and causes, Omar replied, her voice tight. It is a lobbying organization, ma'am, Kennedy corrected, and according to its tax filings, which we pulled, it is funded primarily by 3 major Somali business conglomerates, all 3 of which have direct contracts with the Somali government. So, follow the bouncing ball, Kennedy said. The Somali government pays the businesses fund the council funds you. You received nearly $850,000 from a foreign government-connected organization, Kennedy stated. Did you disclose that connection to your constituents? The contributions were legal and properly disclosed to the FEC, her lawyer interjected from the side. I didn't ask if they were legal, counselor, Kennedy shot back. I asked if she told the voters in Minneapolis that she was cashing checks indirectly signed by Mogadishu, because voters have a right to know when their Congresswoman is funded by a foreign power. Kennedy pulled out another document, this one a corporate financial filing. And it's not just your campaign, it's your kitchen table. The E Street Group, your husband's consulting firm. According to public records, it received $280,000 in payments from Somali business interests in 2023. That is triple what the company made from that sector the year before. What services did his firm provide to justify that payment? Kennedy asked. Did he build a website? Did he run a poll? Or was he just paid for access to his wife? My husband's business is separate from my congressional work, Omar insisted. You live in the same house, Kennedy exclaimed, his voice rising for the first time. You share finances. You file joint tax returns. His income is your income, and his income tripled the year after you started taking regular meetings with Somali government officials. You don't see a connection? Kennedy asked incredulously. You are being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by Somali-connected sources while voting in favor of Somali government interests. That isn't public service, ma'am. That is a conflict of interest on a stick. Kennedy paused, letting the room absorb the financial web. Then he leaned forward, his expression growing darker. But money is just greed. I want to talk about something dangerous. He opened a folder stamped Confidential. Congresswoman, you serve on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. That gives you access to classified intelligence briefings. Is that correct? Yes, she said warily. Including classified briefings specifically about Somalia, Kennedy clarified, about terrorist threats, military operations, intelligence assessments, correct? I cannot discuss classified information in this setting, she said automatically. I am not asking you to reveal the information, Kennedy said. I am asking about your schedule. He held up a timeline graphic titled The Pattern. These are call logs obtained through FOIA requests and subpoena, Kennedy said. They are public record now. August 12, 2023. You attended a closed-door classified briefing on al-Shabaab activity in southern Somalia. That evening, at 7:43 p.m., you placed a 40-minute encrypted phone call to the personal cell phone of the Somali ambassador. What did you discuss in that call? I don't recall the specific conversation, she said, looking down. September 3, 2023. Kennedy moved to the next date. Another classified briefing. This one about U.S. military operations planning in the region. Highly sensitive stuff. That same night, Kennedy said, you had a 35-minute call with an official at the Somali Foreign Ministry. What did you discuss? General diplomatic matters, she whispered. General diplomatic matters? Kennedy repeated scathingly. Ma'am, this is a pattern. 17 times in 3 years, you have attended classified briefings about Somalia, and within 48 hours contacted Somali government officials. Kennedy took off his glasses. At minimum, that shows terrible judgment, he said. At worst, it is espionage. The word hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't detonated yet. I have never, ever compromised classified information, Omar said, her voice shaking. I want to believe that, Kennedy said. I really do. But the pattern is undeniable. You receive sensitive intelligence about Somalia. You immediately contact Somali officials. Then you vote in ways that benefit the Somali government. If you aren't sharing the documents, Kennedy summarized, you are at least sharing the insights. You are giving them the playbook. You are serving their interests, not ours. Senator Kennedy stacked the financial records and the call logs into a neat pile. He looked at the chairman of the committee. "Mr. Chairman, I would like to call a witness, if the committee permits," Kennedy said. The chairman, caught off guard by the request, nodded. "Proceed, Senator." "We have a member of the Somali American community here who requested the opportunity to address these issues," Kennedy announced. "Her name is Amina Hassan. She is a constituent of Congresswoman Omar's district. She flew in from Minneapolis yesterday." From the back of the audience, a woman in her mid-40s stood up. She wore a modest black hijab and a professional gray suit. She walked to the microphone stand that had been set up for audience testimony. Ilhan Omar turned to look at her. She didn't recognize the woman personally, but she recognized the type, the quiet, hard-working immigrant mother who usually formed the backbone of her support. "Thank you, Senator Kennedy," Amina said. Her voice was steady, though her hands gripped the lectern tightly. "And thank you, Congresswoman Omar, for your time." Omar looked wary. She nodded once. "Congresswoman," Amina began, "I voted for you in 2016, and in 2018. I was proud, so proud. To see a Somali woman in Congress, it felt like a miracle." She paused, taking a breath. "But I am here today because you don't represent me," Amina said clearly. "You don't represent our community, and I want you to know that." Omar's expression hardened. "My family fled Somalia in 1993, Amina continued. "During the Civil War. My father was killed by militias fighting over Mogadishu. We spent 3 years in a refugee camp in Kenya. When we finally came to America, my mother cried. She kissed the ground at the airport. She said we were finally safe. Finally home." Amina's voice grew stronger, filling the silent room. "We became citizens in 2001. I remember the ceremony. I was 16 years old. When we took the oath renouncing allegiance to Somalia, my mother squeezed my hand. She whispered, 'We are Americans now.'" "And she meant it," Amina said, looking directly at Omar. "We all meant it." "Somalia failed us," Amina said. "The government there is corrupt, violent, controlled by warlords and terrorists. We came to America because we chose America. We love this country. When people ask me where I am from, I say Minnesota," Amina declared. "When they ask about my heritage, I say I am Somali American. But when they ask where home is, I say America, without hesitation, without qualification." She pointed at Omar. "But you," Amina said, her voice shaking with emotion, "you keep calling Somalia home. You keep taking money from the Somali government. You keep voting to protect their interests, even when it hurts America." "You are not representing Somali Americans," Amina concluded. "You are representing the Somali government. And we are tired of you claiming to speak for us while you serve them." The room was silent. Omar had no response. What could she say? She couldn't call this woman a racist. She couldn't call her an Islamophobe. This was the voice of her own people, rejecting her. Amina sat down. Kennedy nodded to her respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am." Kennedy turned back to Omar. "Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" Omar looked at Amina, then at Kennedy. She looked trapped. I respect her perspective," Omar said weakly. "But I don't think—" "Do you disagree with anything she said?" Kennedy pressed. "I think my record speaks for itself." "It does," Kennedy said. "That is the problem." Kennedy gathered his papers one final time. The slowness was gone now. The trap was set. "Congresswoman, we have established several things today," Kennedy summarized. 1. You consistently refer to Somalia as home or homeland in the present tense, 43 documented instances. 2. You have voted in favor of Somali government interests over American interests 12 out of 12 times, 100%. 3. You have received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Somali government-connected sources. 4. You have attended classified briefings and immediately contacted Somali officials 17 times. And 5, Kennedy said, pointing to the audience, you have just heard from one of your own constituents, a Somali-American refugee like you, saying, you don't represent the community. You represent a foreign government. Kennedy leaned forward, interlocking his fingers. So, I want to ask you a question, Kennedy said, and I want you to answer it honestly. Because I believe the American people deserve an honest answer after everything we have seen today. The room went completely still. The cameras zoomed in. I am going to give you a choice, Congresswoman, Kennedy said. A simple choice. Senator John Kennedy leaned forward, his elbows resting on the mahogany dais. The hearing room was silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness of a storm front moving in. I am going to ask you a question, Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume that somehow carried more weight than a shout. And I want you to answer it honestly, because I believe the American people deserve an honest answer after everything we have seen today. He paused, looking directly at Ilhan Omar. If the United States and Somalia went to war tomorrow, hypothetically, an armed conflict between the two nations, which side would you want to win? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had just been fired. It was a simple sentence. No legal jargon, no policy nuance, just a binary choice. Us or them, America or Somalia. 10 seconds of silence ticked by, then 15, then 20. Ilhan Omar sat frozen at the witness table. Her 3 lawyers were staring at their legal pads, paralyzed. They knew there was no legal objection to a hypothetical question in a congressional hearing. This wasn't a court of law. It was the court of public opinion. You could see the calculations racing behind Omar's eyes. It was a trap, brutal in its simplicity. If she said America, she would be on record contradicting years of rhetoric. She would be alienating the radical base she had cultivated, the people who viewed America as an imperialist aggressor. She would be turning her back on the homeland she had spent so much political capital defending. If she said Somalia, her career would end before she left the room. She would be branding herself a traitor on live television. So she tried to find the third door. That is a ridiculous hypothetical, she finally said, her voice sharp with defensive anger. We are not at war with Somalia. We are allies in the fight against terror. This question is designed to entrap me. Kennedy didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. It is not ridiculous, ma'am, Kennedy said gently. It is the most basic question of loyalty imaginable. 2 countries in conflict. Which side do you want to prevail? Every American citizen should be able to answer that in 1 second, Kennedy added, without thinking, without consulting a lawyer. Which side would you want to win? 25 seconds of silence now. The tension in the room was physical. The C-SPAN cameras zoomed in tight on her face, capturing the bead of sweat tracing a line down her temple. I refuse to engage with Islamophobic hypotheticals designed to question my loyalty, she snapped. I haven't mentioned your religion once today, Kennedy countered instantly. Not once in 2 hours. I have asked about your allegiance to countries, not your faith. This isn't about Islam. This is about whether you are serving American interests or Somali interests. He leaned closer to the microphone. America or Somalia? Which one would you want to win? 30 seconds. The silence was deafening. And then, something happened that no one expected. From the audience, Amina Hassan stood up again. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for a microphone. Just say America, Ilhan. Amina's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Omar turned to look at her, shock registering on her face. This was supposed to be her shield, the community she claimed to protect. Why can't you just say America? Amina shouted, her voice breaking with emotion. My family chose this country. We fled Somalia because it failed us. We came here. We took the oath. Another Somali-American man stood up in the row behind her. Then a woman in a blue hijab. We chose America, the man yelled. Why can't you? You are making us all look bad, the woman cried out. Just say it. The room was teetering on the edge of chaos. The chairman banged his gavel, but the sound was swallowed by the tension. Omar stood up suddenly, her chair scraping violently against the floor. She grabbed her papers with shaking hands. I am not going to sit here and participate in this racist circus, she shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Kennedy. This is a trap. This is performative bigotry. Ma'am, you are still under oath, Kennedy warned, his voice finally rising. You cannot simply leave. Watch me, she spat. She turned and began to walk toward the exit, her lawyers scrambling to gather their briefcases and follow her retreat. Congresswoman, Kennedy called out to her retreating back. She stopped at the heavy wooden doors, her hand on the brass handle. She turned back one last time, her eyes blazing with fury. My answer, she hissed, is that I don't owe you, or anyone else, proof of my loyalty. I took the oath of citizenship. I took the oath of office. That should be enough. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. The oath of citizenship includes renouncing allegiance to all foreign countries, Kennedy said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. But you haven't renounced allegiance to Somalia, have you? You still call it home. You still vote for its interests. You still take its money. The oath isn't enough if you don't honor it, Kennedy said. Omar didn't respond. She pushed through the doors and vanished into the hallway. The hearing room erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Photographers were flashing pictures of the empty chair. Senators were arguing with the chairman, but John Kennedy sat calmly at his desk. He organized his papers into neat stacks, the voting records, the financial reports, the call logs. He capped his pen. He had destroyed a political career in 2 hours, not by shouting, but by asking a question that any loyal American could have answered in a heartbeat. The clips were everywhere within minutes. It wasn't the 2 hours of detailed forensic questioning that went viral. It was the 30 seconds of silence. Which side began trending nationwide before Ilhan Omar even made it back to her office. The video was devastating in its simplicity. Kennedy asking the question. The agonizing pause. Amina Hassan shouting from the audience. And finally, Omar walking out the door without ever saying the word America. By that evening, the political fallout had turned from a storm into a hurricane. And this time, the levees broke. It wasn't just conservative media attacking her. The silence on the war question was so profound, so disturbing, that even her usual defenders in the media couldn't find a way to spin it. On CNN, the evening panel was grim. Look, a Democratic strategist said, shaking his head. I understand not wanting to engage with valid bad faith hypotheticals. But this is the easiest question in politics. If you are an American Congresswoman and you are asked who you want to win a war involving America, you say America. You don't think about it. You just say it. On MSNBC, a legal analyst was blunt. Her silence on that question is going to haunt her forever. In the court of public opinion, silence is an answer, and the answer she gave was, "Not America." The New York Times editorial board published a piece titled, "Representative Omar's Troubling Non-Answer." But the most devastating response came from within her own community, the base she thought she owned. Friday morning, the Twin Cities Somali Coalition, the largest Somali-American organization in Minnesota, released a formal statement. It was read by a group of elders standing outside a community center in Minneapolis. "We came to America by choice," the statement read. "We fled Somalia because the state failed us. We wanted a better life. When we became Americans, we meant it. We chose America. We expect our elected representatives to do the same." Congresswoman Omar's refusal to clearly state her allegiance to the United States is troubling, the statement concluded. "It does not reflect our community's values. We are proud Americans. We wish she would clearly state that she is too." By Friday afternoon, 15 prominent Somali-American imams in Minnesota had signed an open letter echoing the sentiment. They were tired of their patriotism being questioned because of her equivocation. They were tired of defending her dual loyalty when she refused to affirm her singular loyalty. The political consequences were immediate and concrete. Saturday, the Department of Justice announced it was formally opening an investigation into potential FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act, violations, citing the testimony and documents presented at the Kennedy hearing. Sunday, the House Ethics Committee announced its own parallel investigation into her financial relationships with Somali government-connected entities. Monday, new polling data dropped. 68% of Americans believed Omar should have answered the question. 71% believed her refusal indicated divided loyalty. 54% believed she should resign. In her own district, her approval rating plummeted 19 points in 72 hours. Tuesday, the final blow. Don Samuels, the moderate Democrat who had nearly beaten Omar in the 2022 primary, called a press conference in Minneapolis. He stood in front of a row of American flags. "I love this country without qualification," Samuels said, looking directly into the camera. "I love it with my whole heart. I can say without hesitation that if forced to choose between America and any other nation on earth, I choose America every time, without question." He paused. "Apparently, our current representative cannot say the same. That is disqualifying." Samuels announced he was challenging her again in the upcoming primary. The first poll released after his announcement showed him leading Omar by 12 points. Wednesday, the squad fractured. Representatives Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib, and Presley released a joint statement. It was tortured, legalistic, and notably cool. "We support Representative Omar's right to push back against bad faith questioning," it read. "We also believe that all Americans, regardless of heritage, can clearly state their loyalty to this country." Translation: You are on your own. Ilhan Omar's office went into bunker mode. They released multiple statements over the next week. Each one tried to explain. Each one tried to contextualize. They talked about nuance and complex identities and rejecting false binaries. But none of the statements included the sentence, "I would want America to win." That was the problem. In all the spinning, she never actually answered the question. And everyone noticed. Senator John Kennedy gave one interview about the hearing. He spoke to a reporter from The Advocate in Baton Rouge, his local paper. He didn't do a victory lap on national TV. Do you think you were fair to her? The reporter asked. Some people are saying it was a gotcha question. Kennedy paused, taking a sip of iced tea. It is only a gotcha question if you can't answer it honestly, Kennedy said. If you are genuinely loyal to America, you say America without thinking. It's a reflex, like blinking. The fact that she had to think about it, Kennedy said. The fact that she couldn't bring herself to say it, that tells you everything you need to know. 6 months later, the voters of Minnesota's 5th District confirmed his assessment. Ilhan Omar lost her primary by 18 points, the largest margin of defeat for an incumbent member of Congress in Minnesota history. In the end, it wasn't the money that killed her career, though the money was bad. It wasn't the marriage scandal, though that was embarrassing. It was 6 words. Which side would you want to win? And the silence that followed. It wasn't the 2 hours of detailed forensic questioning about financial records or voting patterns that went viral. It was the 30 seconds of silence. Which side began trending nationwide before Ilhan Omar even made it back to her office in the Longworth building. The video was devastating in its simplicity. Senator Kennedy asking the question. The agonizing pause where the only sound was the hum of the ventilation. Amina Hassan shouting from the audience. And finally, Omar walking out the door without ever saying the word America. By that evening, the political fallout had turned from a storm into a hurricane. And this time, the levees broke. It wasn't just conservative media attacking her. The silence on the war question was so profound, so disturbing, that even her usual defenders in the media couldn't find a way to spin it. The clip was played on CNN, on MSNBC, on the nightly network news. It was played in VFW halls in Ohio and in mosques in Michigan. Look, a Democratic strategist said, shaking his head. I understand not wanting to engage with bad faith hypotheticals. I get the instinct to reject the premise. But this is the easiest question in politics. If you are an American Congresswoman and you are asked who you want to win a war involving America, you say America. You don't think about it. You just say it. The fact that she couldn't is a political disaster. On MSNBC, a legal analyst was blunt. Her silence on that question is going to haunt her forever. In the court of public opinion, silence is an answer, and the answer the country heard was not America. Friday morning, the Twin Cities Somali Coalition, the largest Somali-American organization in Minnesota, released a formal statement. It was read by a group of elders standing outside a community center in Minneapolis, the very place Omar had launched her career years ago. Saturday, the Department of Justice announced it was formally opening an investigation into potential FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act, violations, citing the testimony and documents presented at the Kennedy hearing regarding the Qatari and Turkish money trails. 54% believed she should resign immediately. He paused, letting the contrast sink in. Ilhan Omar's office went into bunker mode. They released multiple statements over the next week. Each one tried to explain. Each one tried to contextualize. They talked about nuance and complex identities, and rejecting false binaries. 6 months later, the voters of Minnesota's 5th District confirmed his assessment. On primary night, the results came in early. It wasn't close. Ilhan Omar lost her primary by 18 points, the largest margin of defeat for an incumbent member of Congress in Minnesota history. Ilhan Omar's concession speech was brief. She stood on a stage in a hotel ballroom that was only half full. The energy that had once defined her movement, the electric, rebellious spirit of 2018, was gone, replaced by a sullen resentment. She didn't congratulate Don Samuels. She didn't pledge to help unite the party. Instead, she doubled down on the narrative that had brought her to this point. "We faced a massive right-wing conspiracy," she told the crowd, her voice straining. "We faced millions of dollars in dark money. We faced a media that was complicit in spreading lies." She talked about fighting Islamophobia. She talked about standing up for her community. She talked about not backing down from attacks. But she never mentioned the question. She never addressed why she couldn't answer it. She never mentioned the word America except to criticize it. Even in defeat, she couldn't bring herself to say the thing that would have saved her. In the back of the room, reporters packed up their gear. They knew the story was over. The squad was shrinking. The experiment in radical grievance politics had hit a wall of reality. Maybe there was no good answer for her. If she had chosen Somalia, her career would have ended instantly. If she had chosen America, she would have contradicted everything she had said and done for years, alienating the very specific, radical base she had cultivated. Or she could refuse to answer, which is what she did, and which ended her career anyway. In the end, it wasn't John Kennedy who destroyed Ilhan Omar's political future. It wasn't the Republican Party. It wasn't Fox News. It was a simple question, a binary choice. Don Samuels went on to win the general election easily. In his victory speech, he told the story of his own immigration to America from Jamaica. He talked about the toy boat he had built as a child, dreaming of sailing to the United States. "I am not perfect," Samuels told the cheering crowd, "but I know where my heart is. I know which flag I salute. And I know that you cannot serve two masters." "When I go to Washington," Samuels promised, "I will represent Minnesota. I will represent America. And that is enough." The crowd chanted, "USA! USA! USA!" It was a sound that had been absent from that district's politics for a long time. That evening, Senator John Kennedy sat alone in his office in the Russell Senate office building. The television was off. His phone was silenced. The binder on Ilhan Omar was already in a box, ready to be archived. The work was done. He thought about the young woman who had walked into the hearing room 6 months earlier. The first Somali American elected to national office. The refugee who had become a symbol of what America could offer to the world's most desperate people. She had been given a gift that billions of people around the world dream of: American citizenship. A voice in the world's greatest democracy. Somewhere along the way, she had made choices. She had decided that gratitude was weakness. She had decided that assimilation was betrayal. She had decided that she could use the privileges of American power to undermine American interests. Small compromises at first. A meeting that should have been disclosed. A donation that should have been returned. A phrase that minimized a terrorist attack. Until she had become someone who couldn't answer the simplest question in the world. Kennedy picked up a pen and wrote a note to himself on a legal pad. Loyalty is not a feeling. It is an action. He thought about the oath of citizenship. Renounce and abjure. It wasn't just legalese. It was the price of admission. You leave the old allegiances behind so you can be free to build a new one. Ilhan Omar wanted to keep both. She wanted the power of an American Congresswoman and the allegiance of a Somali nationalist. She wanted to be in the belly of the beast while rooting for the beast to fail. But the system, for all its flaws, eventually demands clarity. Kennedy turned off the lights in his office. He walked out into the hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The lesson, if there was one, was this: you can be proud of your heritage. You can love the culture you came from. You can maintain deep spiritual connections to the place you were born. But if you are going to serve in the United States Congress, you need to be able to say, clearly and without hesitation, that your allegiance is to the United States, not to any other country, not to two countries, just one. It is the most basic requirement of public service in America. And Ilhan Omar couldn't meet it. Her silence said everything.